Ashwin, welcome. And welcome everybody to episode 7 of SaaS Monday live on Fridays. We have a special edition session today where we're just going to do focus on notes of a founder and talk about the journey that Ashwin's been on with a company called Spine AI and Get Spine. But I'll kind of let him kind of tell that story here in a second. Actually, why don't we just dive straight into it? Welcome. Can you kind of tell us what does Spine AI do and kind of your story of you getting here so far?
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for having me, Michael. So Spine AI, we started out as a company that helps private equity and private markets do a lot of their day-to-day work. So this involved us building several features from portfolio management and asset management to other parts of their stack. Most recently, as part of that, we've released a product for doing research. And this is, we call it Spine Research. And we've also made it a lot more general purpose that can do research on any number of topics from medical research to sales to market research and so on. So that's the most recent launch that we've had. And we've started to have hundreds of users sign up since the initial launch day. And so far, yeah, that's been getting quite a bit of traction.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool tool, and if anyone hasn't tried it, you should probably be trying it now. And so let's start with the first kind of problem statement you guys were solving was to help VCs mostly. Is that what you're saying? And kind of help them kind of look at the market. Kind of a fascinating topic to a lot of people listening into here because they're a lot of our viewers are founders or or people on that journey, and so you guys are really unique in that you have went through that journey yourself and found your niche, but on the same token are helping people identify other companies that are interesting to invest in. So can you kind of walk through how you found your journey and your learnings as well as the learnings you're doing or you're helping VCs provide through your AI tools?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the original intent was to solve all parts of the VC stack, and a big part of venture capital, but also general private markets includes private equity, private credit, and so on. And a lot of them do a lot of diligence work. So this is where they're looking at startups. It starts with sourcing, and then you move into the diligence phase where you're in talks with startups. You have a lot of data rooms, private documents on the market, on the company itself. You need to do a whole bunch of analysis and come up with investment memos or these research artifacts that you then need to go in and present to the rest of the organization to make a case for or against going for the startup. And on the flip side, I think since you mentioned the audience also includes founders like myself, we do a lot of this research ourselves. It's just not in a very formal manner, but we look into what the market looks like when we're building new products. We need to understand what the demand curve looks like. What are the other competitors in the space? Competitor analysis is a key part of this process, understanding pricing and other aspects of our competitors as well when we decide what products to build and where we do these kinds of tools. So this is where we started to evolve Spine Research. We started to use it ourselves in many ways as we started to see our customers use it as well in these ways. And we got a lot of value out of this, and that's sort of what motivated us to release this in a more of a general fashion to see how other people could also use and gain value from doing research.
And you did all of it in the era of AI, and we see this huge explosion of AI. When you guys were kind of starting this was more of a niche and a concept, and hey, can we prove it? Now suddenly you're in a ridiculously crowded field, and so it's a fascinating place to be from an outside perspective. You might find it less fascinating and more frightening. I don't know what that means, but so how do you both differentiate in terms of Spine AI compared to all the other new AI tools out there, but also how do you use Spine AI to help VCs and your customers find differentiation in the companies they're researching?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So maybe to take a step back and to really define what the actual research process looks like. So I think in most cases, when research is done well, in many cases, because it's limited by the human capital, you can only do so much of the work. But it usually involves going through and collecting a whole bunch of different data sources typically the web. If you're doing academic research, that might be research papers. It might be looking at specific news articles, compiling a whole bunch of these sources, synthesizing that information, and then, or in the case of VCs, or other entities that have private documents and that have commissioned private research reports. Like we had a real estate company, they had CBRE, which is a firm that does valuation reports on land value. So you have a lot of the private data that you need to go in and do analysis on, which includes also just, are these valuations realistic? So there's a lot of scrutiny on the actual sources itself. And then at the end of the process, you synthesize information and write it into something that is easily consumable by your target audience. So that's what the typical research process looks like. And so far to date, we haven't seen too many tools doing this well. So we've seen the big players that claim to do deep research, or the popular ones have been ChatGPT. I think DeepSeek popularized this because they were also making noise for other political reasons, but they launched their version of deep deep research, and that essentially was scouring through a few different websites and giving you a long form chat response. But in most cases, a chat interface that does just a few dozen extra searches than what you would get from Google or Perplexity is just not going to cut it when you want to do a more thorough, defined research process.
And I do think that's probably where we should probably start diving in a little deeper in terms of, especially as it relates to your tool, because that's a big part of the differentiation story that you tell is, you know, the research kind of tree or story. So, hey, you know, let me know about this and let's go a little deeper. Let's go a little deeper. Let's go a little deeper. While ChatGPT and the other tools can provide what feels like the correct answer, there's no real proof that it is. You can talk about how, you know, what does research mean versus just an LLM giving you a really good and flowery guess. So kind of what's the difference between a proper research and, you know, and an LLM creating stuff that sounds good?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So in general, we've seen that LLMs are really good at doing all the three parts of the research when stitched together properly. So they can come up with the questions that you should be asking on any topic, because in general, when you're starting research on something, you are not an expert by definition, but an LLM has slightly more understanding of the space, so it knows what to look for. So the way we conduct our research and spine research is we have, once you define what the area of interest is, we define a research outline. So this outline outlines a bunch of sections that we're going to produce in the final report, as well as it also goes into detail on the different specific topics it's going to research on every single section. So that's how it goes deeper. And then we orchestrate a huge process with multiple AI models running in parallel that can go in and collect all of this research. And we often do thousands of different websites, your own private documents. This could be call notes if you're doing sales, other kinds of integrations as well. So it goes through and collects all of this information, reacts to some of that data as well, and makes further searches if it deems necessary. And then we have a final compilation process that actually compiles all of this into a complete report that's a lot more detailed. And because we have the volume of data that we're going through, every single claim that's being made is cited, and you have immediate access to the citations as well. And we also have scoring on the citations on how relevant we think the citation might be based on the source it's coming from, relevance to your article, and so on.
Love it. And so one of the things that you've said a couple of times, and one of the things that some of the other AI founders who've been on this series have also kind of stated is private data. So interacting with customers' private data sources. As the CTO of the company, I'm sure one of the first questions you get is from your customers is how do I ensure that my private data, that you're not training on my private data, that you're not taking my private data, that, you know, if the crux of the differentiation of what we have is, you know, we have information other people don't have, and so I want my LLMs to be, or I want my AI agents to be smarter because they have the worldwide data and they also have my special data. How can you ensure to your customer that their special data stays special? And you know, what are the questions you're getting from your customers on the topic?
Yeah, I think that's a very common question that we get asked quite a bit, and I think this was something that was a bigger concern in I guess it's still the early days of AI, but at the earlier days of AI. Now we've seen that most of our model providers, they guarantee that they don't train on the data. They're all SOC 2 compliant, and they specifically claim or state that they don't do any of these trainings. And we also have the same models being used on AWS, Azure, and some of these other cloud providers that also give more enterprise guarantees on top of what the model providers do. So that's one of the key ways in which we guarantee that we don't do any training on top of the data that we're receiving from the customers. On top of that, we ourselves are going through the SOC 2 audit because we know how important security is on our platform as well for customers. And for the really for another tier of enterprise customers, if I may call it that way, they get their own isolated instance, so we can do private deployments for specific customers if they really think that's necessary for them for whatever reason that may be. So we can actually do it on their environment, completely isolated. And also because our platform is completely model agnostic, we can also switch it to be open source models if, again, the customer really needs it to be. So in many cases, there's a very long-winded way of saying the security is in the depth of the features that we offer, and there's different tiers of security. But in most cases, as AI has evolved, I think the best practices have also somewhat caught up, and we kind of understand what we need to do to handle the private data for customers.
Love it. Perfect. And so there's two things that jump out at me when I'm looking through Spine AI from and understanding what you guys do and who you are. One of the words that you guys use a lot, and I hear it from other folks as well, but I'm not sure all of our customers really understand it, which is model agnostic. So you're saying, hey, listen,
Right.
We're a tool, but we're a model agnostic tool. What do people mean when they say that, and why does it matter? And are there people kind of using that term a little incorrectly because they're not really model agnostic? And so is there levels of scale there, or is it hey, listen, we use one model or all? And so Tell me what that means, especially as it relates to Spine.
Yeah, I think the challenge with a lot of the terminology that gets used today is AI has been in the popular parlance only for the last 2 years. So a lot of the terms are fairly new for most of the audience, and it means very different things to different people, which I think is also fine. But the way we use model agnostic is we could literally swap out all the models that we use under the hood with any of the models that our customers really choose if they have a preference to certain models. And there's, again, different reasons for this. One might be for security, or one might be because some customers say, hey, we already work with AWS, all our models are in AWS, can you just use our models to do the work that you're trying to do? That also works for us. And we know that model providers also have different rate limits and different guarantees that they provide. So there's different reasons you may want to do that. There's also power users who actually understand the models at a deeper level, and they say that these models are better for data synthesis. These models are better for data orchestration. So they actually want to go in and pick the models that are actually being used, and not just pick the models, but they may also want to write some prompts for these models. So on our platform, we have tools and capabilities for even those advanced users to actually change completely how the default settings work. And you can rewrite prompts if you want to. You can change every model under the hood to do whatever you want it to do.
Well, and while we're there, and it's because you're a CTO in this field and because you do it every day, what are your favorite models that you're seeing out there? So, I mean, are there some, everybody's model is the newest, the fastest, the best, and everyone's kind of got the one thing that they say their model is ridiculously good at.
Right.
Who's actually exciting? What's fun and exciting in the model world right now?
That's an interesting question. I haven't really thought too deeply about it. I think one of the things that has been more exciting, or in some ways calming, is that there hasn't been a huge jump in model development in about the last year. So I remember the first year and a half of building Spine, we were really every model update meant we have to throw everything out the window and start from scratch, because we'd built all of these things for a model, but the new model either didn't work with those settings, or they'd already solved all of those things and everything we had was irrelevant. So now with, I think, 4.0 launched probably last year, and since then we've seen improvements to 4.0 itself, but that itself has been quite a powerful model. We've seen it as a default in ChatGPT still. They've come up with 4.1, 4.5, but it's not really clear if those are necessarily better. So I think we're seeing some purpose-built models, but the general purpose models have somewhat stagnated since about Claude 3.7 or GPT 4.0. So, and I would say maybe those have been some more of my favorite models. And I guess Claude tends to do better when it comes to writing and code gen, versus GPT is a better tool for quick uses within the application itself.
Love it. And it is kind of crazy that we're now saying, hey, it's slow. We haven't seen a lot of changes recently, and by recently I mean in the last couple of months.
Right.
There was that just onrush of the world changed every couple of seconds, and so I do expect at some point we see those changes again. And so I do really think that model agnostic approach of yours is incredibly important, because you never know when that next iteration, that next revolution is going to happen. We just know that it will. So don't know when, don't know who's going to do it, but we know that it's going to happen. So one of the other terms that I hear a lot, I know it's incredibly important for a solution such as yours, and you've hinted about the concept of it, is human in the loop. So within the AI world, everyone says, well, and it's important to have human in the loop. Can you kind of talk about what does human in the loop mean, and why is it important? And kind of the differences or nuances of it?
Yeah, that's an excellent question again. So I think human in the loop is especially, I guess maybe again to define the term here, generally it literally, quite literally to me at least, means you have a human in the process, and it was less relevant probably when you were just having a simple question to an AI agent, it gives you an answer back. But now we're starting to see AI do more and more things. Like an example of the deep research, some of our research tasks go on for multiple minutes, where we compile all the data, go through all these websites, and give you these sources and give you the results. So in many of these cases, when AI is acting autonomously and almost independently, it's important to have points at which humans can guide the work, because we know these systems are not perfect. They may just do things that are completely unintended and give you results that you weren't expecting. And in a task like research, where you are from the outset exploring things and looking for questions or answers to things that you didn't know what the questions were, I think you're expected to find things that you didn't expect. And once you see the responses, you may want to react to that and do different things. So having an AI agent autonomously go in and do too much work can be potentially not detrimental, but it could lead to things that are just wasted effort. So having a human in the loop to guide the work, to oversee what the AI is doing and iterate on the process is very critical. And that's why we also call our tool an iterative research tool. So you can actually compile your research, and once it's done, it's not the end of the process, but really the beginning. So that's where you can start to go deeper into different topics. You can we offer a lot of flexibility on also the specific websites you may want to use, by domains, by research papers. If you want to only curate it to the last 3 months of news, for example, that is something that you can do as well. So these are not settings that necessarily AI will automatically always pick and get right. So if you have things that are going to be necessary for the way you work, then that's where having the human in the loop makes a lot more sense.
Makes a lot of sense. And so one question I don't think we actually talked about ahead of time, but I was kind of curious. As you design out Spine AI, you're looking at data and helping people compile data and research that isn't as time sensitive, or you're looking at things that are hours old data, or 3 weeks old data, or months old data. Doesn't necessarily matter that much. Have you guys started, or is there a massive difference for customers where they're looking at research, or they're looking at data, and 5-minute old versus is different than 10-minute old data? So I get there's a different worlds, but is that something you guys are looking into, or is that something that matters, and is that built in a different way?
Yeah, so I think if I understand your question correctly, there is definitely value in having recency of data being included as part of the research criteria for certain research topics. So in the case of academic research, when the research was done doesn't really matter, because it doesn't really change the fundamental facts of science or any of the other fundamental truths. But in the case of news, if you're doing research on I don't know, the tariffs on a specific public company. These things have been changing on a daily basis, and you will want to be on top of what the most recent news was to understand the most accurate impact it could have on existing portfolio companies or on a new startup that you're evaluating, if they can even do business in certain domains or not. So those kinds of there are a lot more research topics, even for sales. You'd be interested in learning about something that has changed that gives your company an edge, or that might be impacting a company you're in talks with. So understanding those recent nuggets is a lot more valuable than past information in those contexts.
And from a technology point of view, is it harder to grab recent, or is it just a different concept?
I mean, both is true. I think getting recency right is a hard problem, and yeah, I think that is one of the areas in which that we're also investing a little bit more on, is to understand not just recency, but also in general data curation, what someone cares about, even within the equity. If you're into healthcare versus a different company, you may be interested in different kinds of data sources. So building integrations to different providers and having more curated data sets on the platform is something that is kind of teasing what's coming down the pipeline as well.
Got it. And then as it relates to research, especially as it relates to kind of, as you said, the recent changes in tariffs, but we're also kind of seeing recent changes in, or a lot of changes in terms of data sovereignty and data sovereignty laws. And, Canada and the US was pretty much the same country for a lot of years. And then all of a sudden, Canada data needs to stay in Canada and US data needs to stay in the US. And, then there's Germany and all the rest of it. And so how does kind of data sovereignty kind of start playing into your research, and how do you how good are the LLMs out of the box in understanding that, and how much of that do you have to actually program into your research to say, hey, and take this into consideration and the rest?
So again, if I understand correctly, largely data sovereignty, when you talk about that, it's largely around the engineering pipelines that get built on where we actually store the data and where it gets processed. The LLMs themselves,
and also your customer data. So you say, hey, listen,
right.
go look through this customer data or the rest. And well, if I'm going to go look through Canada customer data, do I need to be doing that within Canada? Can I do that within? Do your LLMs kind of need to know that, or do you just kind of build that behind the scenes? Right. Is that are there reasons within? I guess here's a better way of wording my question. Are there reasons within the AI research where you need to be running your engines in Europe and only in Europe, because that way the data doesn't leave? Or right. Is it still okay to kind of have central processing out of Amazon West 2 in California? Mm-hmm. Are there times where from the research perspective, you have to take the AI engine to the data and operate within that region or within that sovereignty? Right.
So I think this would largely involve private data. So in the case of public data, if it's accessible from one country, it's mostly accessible from the other countries as well. There are subtle differences, but keeping that aside, I think when it comes to private data handling, we've seen some customers want to just keep the data within EU, or even more, they have a specific AWS deployment in one region and they want to keep the data within that and not move it anywhere else. So in those cases, we can do private deployments for folks, and we do the processing there itself completely, and the data doesn't leave. We can, again, that would be a case for having potentially a local open source model running there, or if they have their own flavor of the LLMs deployed into those regions, then we can use those LLMs to conduct the research in that region as well. So we have seen this as an. Sorry,
is that a common customer request, or is it fairly still fairly unique and mostly just towards your large companies?
Yeah, we have seen it. We have had the ask, but it has not been a very common one. I think in most cases, where we've asked, or maybe this gets hidden into, we just need a private deployment and they don't elaborate into the reason. So we have done several private deployments for customers, and it has been into their own cloud and whatever environment they give us. And we're pretty agnostic to that, so we don't really care as well. But in general, the general consensus is, as long as there is general SOC 2 data sovereignty has not been as big of an issue.
Love it. Okay, so I don't think I mentioned at the start, but you guys actually just had a pretty big launch and some publicly available services. Can you kind of walk through your launch process, the kind of the learnings on the launch, and things that went really well, and is there anything that kind of you wish you would have done differently?
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is one of the general themes of how development happens in AI world now. I think we can't hold on to products for too long. It's important to build in public, as the most current parlance goes. So yeah, we recently, and by recently it was literally, I think about 10 days ago, we did a launch, and the product is open and free to use for folks who want to come and try it out. We do have some paid plans as well, where you get access to upload your own private documents, and you get more credits to do the research. And we got quite a bit of interest from the launch, and we had people building reports and doing research in areas we didn't even expect. There were multilingual reports, which we don't even understand some of the languages that they were generated in. There were reports in medical, which seemed to be quite a popular area that people are doing research in, and other financial areas as well. So I think it's been quite an interesting journey to see the different kinds of reports and research that people are doing through the launch. And we've also learned from some of the pain points and areas of struggle with people. So we've also done quite a few improvements, and we'll have some more launches coming along the pipe, as well as other different use cases that we can and workflows that we'll call out more explicitly in the upcoming launches. But yeah, so far I think we've been quite happy with the reception that we've received.
Congrats again. It's a huge accomplishment for anyone. One thing you just you mentioned almost under your breath in that, and I do actually want to dive in a little, is understanding the evolution of your product and your product vision, and like you said, developing in public and taking feedback and taking the story. So what you launched as a product is not exactly what you envisioned at the start of this journey. Can you talk about that evolution and the learnings? Because I do think it's an incredibly important lesson for founders to, you have a vision and your vision's great, but your vision meets the customer and your customer says, this is where I want to go.
Right.
When is it okay to, to switch? When is it okay to modify? When do you need to hold firm to the vision? And talk about that story and how you guys got where you're at.
Yeah, I think the way that AI and with AI coding tools, especially, the product development cycle has gotten a lot easier. So with that, I think customer feedback is one of the most critical resources that founders have today. And that's a double-edged sword, because like you mentioned, there are times when you do need to not necessarily ignore the customer feedback, but hold firm to your vision and drive forward what you're trying to do. So in most cases, if you ask customers if they want a flying car, they would say yes. But understanding the logistics and then the R&D required to actually build that, as well as they have to learn how to fly a driving car, and there'll be traffic in the air as well. So there's all kinds of other challenges that you'd have to deal with. So in most cases, what we've learned is, I think building one thing that's really a big problem, but that's solved well, is better than adding a lot of flashy features, because then you end up with a more generic product that's struggling for differentiation, and it has a lot of half-baked features that people are struggling to understand and learn as well. So that has been one of the biggest lessons through the journey, which is try to keep it simple. And we're also in a bit of a tech bubble in Silicon Valley here, where we assume everybody understands the technology and how things have evolved, but there are still people who haven't even used ChatGPT. So we're teaching people as we go as well, and adding more features means there's more things for folks to learn. So this is, again, going back to just driving depth and really picking and choosing what customer feedback is very relevant towards that, and focusing on our customers getting value more than what do they actually want.
And so from your experience and kind of your advice back to other founders, how many customers do you need for that feedback? Is it just one? Find your one customer and partner up and go? Do you need three? Is there a case for the little customer who you're probably not making much money with, but he's providing great feedback, and so, but there's also that one customer who's most of your revenue's coming from him. So all of us kind of have those in the startup space. We all kind of have that. How do you balance between them? What is your ideal mix of how much is enough customer feedback? Is there such a thing as enough? So what's the balance there?
Yeah, and I know a lot of my experience may not translate well to every startup. Every startup is different. Building 0 to 1, everybody's doing something that hasn't happened before. So it's hard to generalize some of these things. So the short answer is it depends. I think the long answer is it's currently not as critical. I mean, the key thing to optimize for is usage, and are people actually getting value? And if you're able to get that from one large enterprise customer who has an army of people using you, that's great. But if it's just one large enterprise customer with one user, then that might be a bit of a risk, because you're essentially building for one person. If that person leaves, or if something changes, then everything is dependent on that. So if you're able to find a random number out there, 100 users who love your product, whether it's all within one enterprise or even free or somewhat paying users in the open space in the B2C world, I think that's more important to optimize for than for a revenue metric or the number of enterprise clients who are potentially using you.
Love it. One of the things that you also you also kind of said that I would also like to dive into is, and it's a pretty hot topic that we're seeing around, especially with VCs, is use of AI in your coding, and how much of that. So Microsoft recently said that 30% of their development is currently done by AI, and they're expecting that number to grow. The number is never going to be 100%, but it's definitely going to be more than 30%. As a founder in AI, as a leader in that space, how do you balance expectations of you now expect your developers to be able to be more efficient? They should be able to code more and code faster. How does that change over the last year, and what do you kind of see that changing next year? Because it's definitely going to be changing.
Yeah, I think in general, people are able to build faster. I think you're stuck less. I think that's more how I find these coding tools to help, where I'm not researching documentation, I'm not debugging too deeply. I can quickly ask someone, and the someone being an LLM, for some feedback on what I'm working on. And it can write quite a lot of boilerplate code, or some features even entirely. In many cases, when you are building a larger product, they do tend to go off the rails and create a lot of different things that become a nightmare to debug and clean up and maintain in the long term. So there is a trade-off between how much you want to quickly build up with these LLM tools. They're fine for prototypes. Now they've gone from that stage to maybe you can actually build out features with them as well. But I think it's still a ways away from being close to 100%. But yeah, in general, I think it has changed expectations for developers. So we do have to be moving a lot faster and shipping things rather than in maybe a sprint. Now you're expected to do it in 1 or 2 days. I think that's been the bigger change, or at least have an understanding of the problem and call out the different dependencies within a 2 days. So that would be the time compression.
Love it. And going back to the statement of human in the loop in terms of research, human in the loop in terms of development is also pretty important, and having the right human in the loop in terms of development, because I can kind of code, but you don't want me reviewing the AI code, because I can say, yes, that works, that doesn't, versus it's efficient. Or one of the terms that we were using in a lot of the sessions before this is technical debt. And so, like you said, having something coded that's good enough but is not clean, smooth, or properly understood can cause some technical debt you're going to have to address down the road.
Exactly.
And so you've launched. It was 10 days ago. You've got hundreds of users. Huge, amazing story. kind of what's next. So how do you start figuring out what is, you've got your 6-month roadmap clearly, because that is part of your launch and your stability. How do you balance you're adding new features while dealing with these hundreds of users, and where are you going next?
Yeah, so in addition to the hundreds of users, we have quite a few enterprises also who are onboarding right now and trialing us out, or different stages of using us. So I think one of the key things is to learn from what the feedback is from a lot of these folks. And enterprises have also been a good way to partner with to get that focused discussions and get the feedback directly from people who use us. It can sometimes be challenging from just looking at the metrics from the other users, but um, so all parts of the research pipeline, it starts with curating your data sources. So we're going to be doing more work there to add some more curated data sets, give some more control to folks. There's going to be more work in the actual synthesis. So we're changing some of our architecture on how much and how often the LLMs react to the research they see to create further research tasks and go deeper into the research, essentially. So we're adding different research modes, and we're tailoring that to whether you're doing a meta-analysis on medical work versus if you're doing a tear sheet on a company, or if you're doing sales. They require different types of research. So we're starting to iron out some more of those workflows as well. And the last bit is also coming up with more artifacts to understand how users can consume the research. So right now we have a fairly large and detailed research document, but it's not something that everybody wants to go through and parse out. So having different ways in which, so potentially a slide deck and having other modes, just to tease out a few, is to how do you consume those and generate other artifacts that people will eventually do anyway once you have the research that's compiled. So that's kind of the 3 stages and how we're thinking about the next upcoming features.
So data synthesis is, again, one of those big AI words that you'll hear a lot of people say. It does mean slightly different things to different people. Can you actually double click on data synthesis for a second and kind of talk about why that matters so much within AI and what we mean when we say it?
Yeah, so it's a fair call out. I think I kind of myself use it in a few different ways. So one is to actually source and pick out the data sources that is actually getting used. And to do that, we actually generate a lot of metadata on the actual websites, on the documents that get ingested into the system. And that's what helps inform when and how often we need to pull and interrogate certain sources. And the actual next step is actually how do we actually leverage those data sources and the snippets within them to compile our research. So that goes into understanding, is this relevant to what the topic is? Should we include it in the final analysis or not? Do we present it as a table? There's different compilation ways as well. So those are the main broad areas and what I mean when I say data synthesis.
No, and I didn't mean it as a call out. I just wanted to help people understand, because there are a lot of terms that, again, from a Silicon Valley point of view, we throw it around and we know what it means, but not everyone else kind of listening in does. And it does kind of speak to one of the interesting spaces I am seeing, especially when it comes to AI and machine learning specialists. And so these are kind of big thinkers, and they're the HPC guys from the past, high performance compute clusters, now kind of coming into the world of IT and now saying, well, the data is in that database and I can trust that that data is accurate, or I don't know if that data is accurate. And so the merging between AI and data has always been a thing, but it is an incredibly important thing. And knowing the accuracy of your data before making AI decisions is problematic. It is incredibly important, because AI has a tendency of just assuming that the data is accurate.
Right.
And actually, so maybe that's the next kind of core conversation is when doing research, how much risk is AI just making up an answer? How big of a risk is hallucination, and how do you kind of start to solve for that or check for that? Is it, can you run, multiple agent or multiple LMs, or so what is kind of the process to start, stomping out, issues either because of data inconsistency or because of a hallucination?
Yeah, so that's another good question. I think similar to code, one of the advantages we have with research is the output is text, and you can read and review what's going on as well. And in our case, one of our earliest decisions was to bombard the entire report with citations. So almost every claim in there has a very quick citation that you can just hover over and see exactly where it picked up, as well as all the other metadata around that source itself. So you can also verify if that was a useful source or the right source to be leveraging in that area. So with the volume of data we're processing, where we have thousands of different sources that we're pulling in, and we eventually end up with reports that cite about 150 to 300 citations. So that volume makes it very hard for an LLM to make stuff up, because it already has access to so much information that it leverages that to produce the final response. In addition to that, like you called out, we do have critiquing mechanisms where we actually have another agent that goes in and critiques the data that gets produced at the end. And then the final reviewer is the human who has access to all the information that was compiled, so they can do the final checks as well.
And I think that kind of answers one of the original questions I asked at the first of the call, which is, how do you differentiate between what you guys are doing and what the general, chat GPTs or DeepSeek are doing? Because they've got a research button too, and they produce what looks like really accurate information, but there's a difference. And that difference is all of the work you guys are doing to pull from all the different sources, cite all the different sources, and then kind of construct it layer by layer by layer. And so, like everything else, the better your data, the more sources of your data, the better. It did kind of strike me though. You say you guys are pulling by default from hundreds of different data sources. 10 years ago, the message was we need to actually consolidate all of our data into one place. Are we saying that maybe we don't need to anymore? Is AI still is AI going to be pretty good enough? It's going to be good enough that we kind of leave those data in all those different places and AI can go find it? Or is there a case to be made where we need to, and then it's not specific a question of Spine AI, it's just more of a general AI question. Is there a case to be made for we still need to run the data warehouses?
And again, the answer is it depends on the workflows that gets used. So one of our customers, for example, they wanted to understand a specific land research in Japan. And to do this, you want to understand the government regulations in Japan. You don't care about what the federal regulations are in the US or in Canada. So in these types of cases, there is a lot of reason to scope your data so we provide ways of, you can scope it by domains to specific government website domains or other Japanese providers. And in many other cases, the most high quality data comes from valuation reports that the company has commissioned and then done privately. And these are generated as reports as well. So it really depends on the workflows. In some cases, if you're doing general web research, that's very powerful for doing understanding recent events, understanding the relevance of those things. There's a lot of online information on that. For research papers, again, there's specific sites that already curate and document a lot of these, and we're able to tap into those and pull the relevant research papers. So, and there's also a new industry of web search providers that have popped up with to compete against Google and SERP, especially with Microsoft deprecating SERP as a more recent thing. So I think the ecosystem of the data curation and compiling the web into something more usable for AI as well is a very burgeoning space, and a lot of startups have started to emerge there as well. So there is a case to be made for that, but there's also no substitute for well-crafted, curated private data that you may have compiled or your company has already organized on yourself, competitors, markets, industries, and so on. So, and in those cases, much of the pulling of the sources is just interrogating those documents to make sure, are those documents correct? Are those documents relevant? And asking multiple questions of the same document through review and pull every relevant piece from there that might be relevant for the report.
Love it. And so, from a Spine AI perspective, you guys started with VC. You've reached out. You're doing a lot of other fields. You did mention medical is becoming a pretty hot topic. What are the other kind of core use cases you're starting to see kind of explode on within your user base? And so, what's kind of the places you're focusing on next?
I think sales is a big one. So sales, where we've had a lot of people reach out and ask about. I'm doing research on these companies as potential ways of selling to them, or I need to understand my competitive landscape when it comes to against my competitors. So that's a mix of a sales and a founder angle or a leadership angle to understand what kind of products and services to invest into next. And another related one, just expanding on the VC, just going all the way across private markets. So private equity and private credit, just understanding where to invest, how are different companies going to perform, how do the political situations affect some of my investing decisions, doing due diligence on companies. So a lot of those would be like the three main buckets. I think one is like academic research, there's one on sales, and then would be the understanding markets and how different companies play into that space.
Yeah, you can't walk around without hearing private credit a lot lately. That seems to be kind of the one of the hottest topics out there. And everyone used to want to work for the big banks, and then they wanted to work for the hedge funds. Now everyone seems to want to work for the private credit guys. And so,
Right.
if there's any folks out there who aren't paying attention to that space, they should, because it's a pretty hot space. And I do think it makes a lot of sense for you guys to be front and center. The tool you've built is perfect for them, and so that makes a lot of sense. But as it relates to the kind of those industry verticals, how much technical work is there to kind of gear up your tool to be good for medical, which and HIPAA and all these weird things that are unique to the medical vertical versus the FinServ angle vertical? And is
Right.
that from your perspective, is there a lot of work to meet the two? Is a different product for the two, or is it just making sure your one tool is good at both?
I think right out of the box right now, the tool is capable of serving and adding value to all the three verticals. I think that's how people are discovering us and reaching out to try and use us more broadly. There are things we can do to make their lives easier. And a lot of that involves compiling it into different artifacts that they may be expecting at the end of each of these reports. So some of them may want slide decks to present to leadership. Some of them want a transcript that they can use in their sales calls, or some talking points that they can synthesize out into. Some, when it comes to medical, you want to write an actual research paper, potentially, and hopefully not just copy paste it to do your homework, but you can actually use it to do actual medical research and learn about new topics and so on, become an expert in those domains. So all three of those things are already possible. And then the other big aspect is some more data curation. We've heard from some folks, especially in private markets, that there are some more private data sources. Integrating with those providers would be very valuable to them, or having ways of just working better with their documents and understanding when and how to pull certain documents to do standard kinds of analysis, like bottom-up TAM analysis or total addressable market analysis and so on. So, and that's a different pattern from what you would do when you do meta-analysis on research papers. So there are certain specific workflow items that we will be changing to make it better suited for them. But as it currently stands, it's already pretty valuable.
Love it. And again, it makes sense, especially the way you guys structured it, where it's modular and it built up with human in the loop, which allows you to have the expert in the loop. So if you're doing medical research, I'm going to assume that you're a medical expert, and so here's the information, and you can guide our LLM on its journey because you're the expert in that space. And so it makes a lot of sense. And so we have reached the end. I do want to kind of leave out the final kind of standard question, which is advice for founders. Is there one or two things that you would think that you really would have done either differently or earlier or bigger or better? So for the founders listening in, especially in the AI world, and everyone's got some kind of AI, what's the one piece that you leave them with?
That's a tough one. I'd say, again, going back to something I said before, it's right now, AI is very new and there's a lot of temptation to build a lot of different cool things. But I think focusing on the problem and figuring out the features don't have to be flashy. I think one of the biggest competitors SaaS is still spreadsheets. So it's as long as people can get value out of what you're building, the end form factor doesn't matter, and it's most critical to focus on the value aspect of things. And that's something that is probably one of the biggest lessons I've gotten from this journey.
So do the thing you promised and do it very well.
And potentially do it quickly, do it simply, make it easy for people to understand what you've built, and then get value out of it. And you can always build on top of that once you find the real ICPs that you're going after.
Love it. So thank you for taking the time. Thank you for sharing your learnings. Congratulations again on your launch. It's a huge deal. I'm a huge fan of the product and the tool. I use it. I'm definitely one of your hundreds of users, that growing to thousands of users here soon. So
Yep.
Congratulations on everything. Again, Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Yeah, thanks for having me. And everyone else listening on the call, yeah, feel free to try it out. It's, again, free and open to use for you. So yeah, awesome.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks. See ya.